They thought she was just another overweight farmer's wife at the Riverside Farmers Market, an easy target for their drunken amusement. The Hell's Thunder motorcycle gang watched as Sarah Thompson arranged her organic produce stand, her practical overalls and weathered hands suggesting nothing more than a simple country life, and decided they'd found the perfect opportunity to make their presence known in Cedar Valley County. What these intoxicated troublemakers didn't realize was that Sarah Thompson wasn't just another vendor selling homegrown vegetables. She was Lieutenant Commander Sarah "Silent Storm" Thompson, one of the first female Navy SEALs in U.S. history, whose classified operations in the Arabian Sea had earned her the Navy Cross, and whose tactical brilliance had led to the successful extraction of 3 hostage rescue missions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the historic Riverside Farmers Market, its warmth beginning to penetrate the autumn chill that clung to the Missouri countryside. Inside the sprawling, open-air pavilion, the aroma of fresh-baked bread and seasonal flowers mingled with the earthy scent of just-harvested vegetables, creating an atmosphere that had made this weekly gathering the heart of Cedar Valley's agricultural community since 1952. The restored timber beams creaked gently overhead, while local artisans and farmers set up their displays, each vendor adding their own touch to the tapestry of rural life. Sarah Thompson moved with surprising agility as she arranged her display of organic vegetables, each item placed with the same precision she once used to plan covert operations. At 42, her sturdy frame and practical appearance helped her blend seamlessly into the farming community, though few would guess that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a warrior whose combat experience had rewritten special operations protocols. Her calloused hands, now dirty from working the soil of Thompson family farms, had once handled weapons in some of the world's most dangerous territories. The market's ancient wooden floorboards groaned underfoot as early morning customers began trickling in, their footsteps echoing through the vast space. Regular vendors nodded greeting to one another as they prepared for another busy Saturday. Martha Chen's fresh-baked pies steamed invitingly next to Sarah's vegetable stand, while old Jack Wilson arranged his honey jars with arthritic care, the morning light catching the amber liquid and casting golden reflections across the walkway. Sarah maintained her situational awareness, a habit ingrained through years of special operations training. She noticed Billy Cooper, the market's teenage security guard, making his morning rounds, his uniform crisp but his inexperience evident in his eager stride. The Anderson family was setting up their dairy stand across the aisle, their twin daughters helping to arrange cheese samples while casting excited glances at their phones. Mark Rodriguez, a retired police officer who now sold handmade leather goods, was telling his usual morning jokes to anyone within earshot. Through the market's wide entrance, Sarah caught glimpses of motorcycles beginning to fill the parking lot, their chrome finishes reflecting the morning sun. The Hell's Thunder gang had been moving through the region, their reputation for harassment and intimidation growing with each small town they passed through. Local law enforcement seemed hesitant to confront them directly, leading to a growing sense of unease among the community's business owners. The relative peace of the morning market was shattered by the heavy thud of motorcycle boots on wooden planks. The gang's leader, Marcus "Scorpion" Blackwood, stumbled slightly as he entered, his movements betraying the previous night's drinking session that had clearly extended into the morning. Behind him, his lieutenants Jake "Ghost" Harrison and Steve "Bruiser" Martinez flanked him like menacing shadows, their leather vests adorned with patches that marked their allegiance to Hell's Thunder. Regular customers instinctively moved away from the biker's path, parents pulling children closer, elderly shoppers retreating behind displays. The morning's cheerful chatter died down to worried whispers as Scorpion and his men made their way through the market, their presence casting a dark cloud over the previously peaceful scene. Billy Cooper's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his radio, then thought better of it, his youth and inexperience rendering him frozen in place. Sarah continued arranging her heirloom tomatoes, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Her mind, however, was already mapping exit routes, calculating angles, and identifying potential improvised weapons, skills that had kept her alive during countless classified operations. Her apparent focus on her produce stand masked her acute awareness of every movement around her, every subtle shift in the market's atmosphere. Well, what do we have here? Scorpion's voice carried across the market floor, thick with mockery and the lingering effects of alcohol. "Looks like we found ourselves a real country feast." His lieutenants chuckled on cue, their laughter carrying an edge of menace that caused nearby vendors to look away. The bikers' attention had fixed squarely on Sarah's stand, their path now direct and purposeful. The morning light streaming through the market's high windows caught the patches on their vests, the elaborate designs marking them as members of a gang whose influence had been growing across 3 states. 2 more Hell's Thunder members appeared at the market entrance: Tony Switchblade Ramirez and Pete Icepick Davidson, their nicknames earned through reputation rather than prison time, though they had seen plenty of both. Sarah's hands remained steady as she continued her work, though her mind was already processing tactical options. She'd faced worse odds in places where backup was continents away, but here, in this peaceful market where she'd built a new life with her husband Jack, the stakes felt different. These weren't trained combatants with political objectives. They were bullies looking for easy targets, making them potentially more unpredictable. The familiar weight of her wedding ring pressed against her finger as she straightened a display of bell peppers, a reminder of the life she'd built here after leaving the service. Jack Thompson's family had farmed this land for 4 generations, and when she'd married him 3 years ago, she'd found a peace she never thought possible after her years in special operations. Now, watching Scorpion and his men approach her stand, Sarah knew that peace was about to be tested in ways the market's regular customers could never imagine. Scorpion swaggered closer to Sarah's produce stand, his weathered boots scuffing against the market's wooden planks. The morning light filtering through the high windows caught the silver chains hanging from his vest, creating dancing patterns that matched the erratic movement of his alcohol-impaired gait. Behind him, Ghost and Bruiser spread out in a practiced formation, their presence creating a barrier between Sarah and any potential interference from other vendors or customers. "Quite the spread you got here, Mama," Scorpion drawled, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure everyone nearby could hear. His hand reached out, deliberately knocking over a carefully arranged pyramid of organic apples. The fruit scattered across the wooden counter, several rolling onto the floor where Bruiser crushed one under his heel with obvious satisfaction. Shame if something were to happen to all this. Fresh produce. Sarah maintained her composure, her hands continuing their methodical work of straightening her remaining displays. Years of covert operations had taught her to control every micro-expression, to reveal nothing of the tactical assessments running through her mind. She noted how Ghost's right hand kept straying to his jacket pocket, how Icepick and Switchblade had positioned themselves near the main exits. Amateur tactics, but effective enough against ordinary civilians. "Can I help you gentlemen find something specific?" Sarah's voice remained steady, professional, though her trained eye had already identified 17 different ways to incapacitate the entire group using just the items within arm's reach. A bunch of carrots, properly leveraged, could become surprisingly effective when one knew the human body's vulnerable points. The corner of her wooden display stand, if necessary, could be quickly converted into a defensive position. "Oh, we're just admiring the local culture." Ghost moved closer, deliberately invading her personal space. His breath reeked of stale beer and cigarettes as he leaned over the counter. "Nice little market you got here. Peaceful, traditional. Be a shame if things started getting uncomfortable for the vendors." Martha Chen had retreated to the far end of her pie stand, her face pale with recognition of the implied threat. Old Jack Wilson's hands trembled as he pretended to rearrange his honey jars, while the Anderson twins had disappeared behind their parents' dairy display. Mark Rodriguez, the retired cop, watched the scene unfold with growing concern, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that was no longer there. "We're all about community service," Bruiser added, his massive frame casting a shadow over Sarah's colorful vegetable display. "Protecting local businesses, for a reasonable fee, of course. Call it an insurance policy against accidents." His meaty fist closed around a ripe tomato, squeezing until the fruit burst, red pulp dripping between his fingers. Sarah watched the tomato's destruction with the same detached calm she'd maintained during high-stakes operations in foreign territories. Her mind flashed briefly to a midnight extraction in Yemen, where maintaining cover had meant enduring far worse provocations while waiting for exactly the right moment to act. The market's wooden beams creaked overhead, a sound not unlike the hull of a submarine under pressure, another environment where patience and precise timing meant the difference between life and death. "I appreciate the offer," Sarah replied, carefully moving her prized heirloom vegetables away from Bruiser's reach. "But we've been managing just fine here at the market for generations without any special insurance." Her movement, though appearing casual to observers, positioned her at a tactically advantageous angle relative to all 5 bikers. Scorpion's scarred face twisted into what might have been meant as a smile but came across as more of a predatory grimace. "You ain't listening good, woman. Times are changing. Route 71's getting dangerous these days. Lots of accidents waiting to happen. Equipment failures. Health code violations. Produce going bad overnight. Small vendors like you? You're vulnerable." Through the market's broad entrance, more motorcycles pulled into the parking lot, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Hell's Thunder was making a show of force, demonstrating their numbers to anyone who might consider resistance. The morning sun caught their chrome pipes and leather jackets, creating an intimidating display of power that had most of the early customers hurriedly completing their purchases and heading for their cars. "My husband and I run a simple farm," Sarah continued, her voice carrying just enough edge to make Ghost pause momentarily in his harassment. "We're not looking for any complications." The mention of her husband wasn't just for show. Jack Thompson was currently making his weekly supply run to Kansas City, his ancient pickup truck loaded with their excess produce for the restaurant trade. He was also one of the few people who knew the full extent of her military background, having met her at a veterans support group shortly after her retirement from active duty. Switchblade moved closer, his thin frame weaving between market stands with predatory grace. "Speaking of husbands, where is yours? Leaving such a vulnerable woman all alone. Not very gentlemanly." His hand traced along Martha Chen's pie display as he passed, leaving small scratches in the polished wood with something concealed in his palm. The morning light caught Sarah's wedding ring as she carefully wrapped a bundle of organic kale for a frightened-looking customer who'd been caught in the confrontation. The simple gold band had replaced the tactical rings she'd once worn on covert operations, devices that could be used as impromptu brass knuckles when necessary. "He'll be back soon enough," she replied, her tone carrying a warning that the bikers, in their alcohol-induced bravado, completely missed. Scorpion leaned heavily against Sarah's wooden stand, his weight causing the carefully constructed display to creak ominously. The morning had progressed, and the market's usual bustling atmosphere had been replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the sound of motorcycle engines idling outside. Through the high windows, Sarah could see at least a dozen more Hell's Thunder members maintaining a perimeter around the building, their presence casting long shadows across the parking lot. "Last chance for the easy way," Ghost announced, his fingers drumming an irregular pattern on the counter. "Simple business arrangement. Weekly payments, no problems. Everyone stays healthy, stays in business." His other hand remained near his jacket pocket, the outline of what Sarah recognized as a switchblade visible beneath the leather. Sarah's mind rapidly processed the tactical situation, while her hands continued their methodical work of salvaging what produce she could from the bikers' deliberate destruction. The market's layout, once familiar and comforting, now presented both challenges and opportunities. The narrow aisle between stands limited movement, but also created natural choke points. The overhead beams, which had supported the building since its construction in 1952, offered several advantageous angles if things escalated. "You know," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same measured calm she'd maintained during hostage negotiations in Baghdad, "in my experience, real threats don't need this much conversation." The statement caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a momentary pause in the biker's posturing that only a trained operative would notice. Bruiser's massive frame shifted forward, alcohol and anger overriding any sense of caution. "That's supposed to be funny, fat girl? You got experience with threats?" His hand shot out, grabbing a handful of Sarah's overalls near the collar. The move was telegraphed, clumsy, nothing like the trained combatants she'd faced in her previous life. "Actually," Sarah replied, her position shifting almost imperceptibly. "I do." Her hand moved to adjust her apron, a gesture that concealed her assessment of Bruiser's vulnerable points. In her mind, she could hear the voice of her SEAL training instructor. "The best weapon is the one your opponent doesn't realize you have until it's too late." The market's ancient floorboards creaked under their feet as tension mounted. Mark Rodriguez had managed to quietly usher most of the remaining customers toward the side exit, his experience as a former police officer evident in his efficient, unobtrusive movements. Martha Chen clutched her phone behind her pie display, fingers hovering over the emergency dial, while old Jack Wilson's weathered hands gripped his honey jar like a makeshift weapon. Scorpion straightened up, his alcohol-clouded eyes attempting to focus on Sarah's calm demeanor. "You're either brave or stupid, lady. Either way, you're about to learn why they call me Scorpion." His hand moved toward his back pocket, where Sarah had already noted the outline of brass knuckles, a predictable choice for someone relying on intimidation rather than skill. "You know what's interesting about scorpions?" Sarah's voice remained conversational, even as she cataloged the positions of all 7 gang members now surrounding her stand. In the desert, they're considered one of the most dangerous predators, but in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing. She let the statement hang in the air, her mind flashing back to a particular night operation in the Persian Gulf where she'd had to explain to her team why scorpions weren't actually their biggest concern. Icepick moved closer, his thin frame weaving between market stands. "Boss, something ain't right about this one. Most people, they're crying or begging by now." His instincts, honed by years of street fights, were picking up on something his conscious mind couldn't quite process. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, the same one she'd worn before leading her team into what had appeared to be an impossible extraction in Kandahar. "You know what the biggest mistake in combat is?" She adjusted her stance slightly, her movements so subtle that none of the bikers recognized them as the preparation they were. "Assuming you know everything about your opponent." Through the market's windows, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the wooden floors. The idling motorcycles outside created a constant rumble that masked other sounds, the quiet movements of vendors retreating to safer positions, the soft click of Martha Chen's phone completing its emergency call, the almost imperceptible sound of Sarah's boots finding optimal purchase on the worn floorboards. Bruiser's grip on her overalls tightened, his alcohol-fueled confidence building. "Combat? Lady, you've been watching too many movies. This ain't combat, this is just business." His free hand formed into a fist, drawing back an emotion that broadcast his intentions as clearly as a training demonstration. "That's another common mistake," Sarah continued, her voice carrying just enough authority to make Ghost hesitate in his approach. "Confusing intimidation with actual fighting ability." Her eyes, which had seemed so ordinary moments before, now held a focus that made Icepick take an unconscious step backward. It was the same look she'd worn during the classified operation that had earned her the Navy Cross, though the official records of that night would remain sealed for decades to come. The tension in Riverside Farmers Market stretched taut as a tripwire, the kind Sarah had once navigated through darkness in territories where one wrong move meant mission failure, or worse. Bruiser's grip remained tight on her overalls, his massive frame looming over her produce stand like a shadow of impending violence. The morning light streaming through the market's high windows caught the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, his alcohol-addled mind slowly registering that something about this situation had shifted beyond his control. "Enough talking," Scorpion snarled, brass knuckles now glinting in his right hand. "Time to learn what happens to people who don't understand simple business opportunities." He moved forward, his boots scuffing against the wooden floor in a way that told Sarah exactly how he would distribute his weight in the coming attack. Amateur, predictable, nothing like the trained operators she'd once faced in combat. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for Sarah, her SEAL training kicking in with the precision of countless drills and real-world operations. Bruiser's grip on her overalls became his first mistake. A solid hold meant a predictable point of leverage. His second mistake was assuming her size meant limited mobility. As his partner moved in, Sarah's hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had turned everyday objects into weapons across 5 continents. The bundle of organic carrots in her left hand became a perfectly balanced striking tool, targeting pressure points that her instructors had once demonstrated in classified facilities. Her right hand, calloused from years of both farming and combat training, found purchase on Bruiser's wrist at exactly the angle needed to turn his own strength against him. The movement appeared almost gentle to observers, like a dance step that ended with the massive biker suddenly airborne, his trajectory carrying him directly into Scorpion's advancing form. "What the fu—" Ghost's exclamation was cut short as Sarah moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for someone of her build. The wooden produce stand, which had appeared so ordinary moments before, now served as a tactical barrier that Sarah used with the same expertise she'd once applied to urban combat scenarios. A head of cabbage thrown with precise force interrupted Ice Pick's attempt to flank her position. Market vendors and remaining customers watched in stunned silence as Sarah Thompson, who they'd known only as the friendly farmer who made amazing organic salsa, moved with the controlled violence of a highly trained operative. Her techniques weren't the showy moves of action movies. They were the efficient, devastating applications of force that had been refined through actual combat experience. "Now, gentlemen," Sarah's voice remained calm, even as she used Switchblade's own momentum to send him crashing into a display of local honey jars. "I think we need to revise our discussion about vulnerability." Her positioning had already shifted, giving her clear lines of sight to all potential threats while maintaining multiple escape routes. Standard SEAL tactical doctrine applied to a farmer's market. 2 more Hell's Thunder members rushed in from the entrance, drawn by the sounds of combat. Sarah noted their approach with the same tactical awareness that had once helped her coordinate multi-team extraction operations. The market's layout, which she had memorized over 3 years of peaceful Saturday mornings, now served as a combat grid in her mind. "Lady, you have no idea what you've started," Scorpion growled, struggling to his feet while trying to maintain his grip on his brass knuckles. His attempt to project menace was somewhat undermined by the organic tomato juice staining his leather vest, his earlier destruction of her produce now coming back to mark him. "Actually," Sarah corrected him, her stance shifting to account for the new threats, while remaining seemingly relaxed. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Just like I knew exactly what I was doing during Operation Silent Storm in the Arabian Sea, though that's still classified." The reference meant nothing to the bikers, but it caused Mark Rodriguez, the retired cop, to suddenly straighten up with recognition. That operation had been whispered about in law enforcement circles for years. The morning sun had fully illuminated the market's interior now, dust motes dancing in the beams of light that filtered through the high windows. Sarah was aware of Martha Chen's phone recording the entire incident, of old Jack Wilson's quiet movements to shepherd younger vendors toward safety, of the approaching sirens that suggest. Sarah's slight smile never wavered as she casually picked up another tomato from her stand, tossing it lightly from hand to hand with the same precision she'd once used to handle more lethal objects. "You know what the hardest part of SEAL training was?" she asked conversationally, her eyes tracking every subtle movement of the remaining bikers. "It wasn't the physical challenges. It was learning when to end a confrontation without unnecessary escalation." The market's wooden beams creaked overhead as tension hung in the air like morning mist. Through the windows, the flashing lights of approaching police cars began to paint the interior in alternating patterns of red and blue, creating a strobing effect that reminded Sarah of certain night operations she'd led in coastal waters. "Lady, you're dead," Switchblade snarled, pulling himself up from the remains of old Jack Wilson's honey display, golden liquid dripping from his leather vest. "You and this whole market Hell's Thunder doesn't forget." His hand moved toward his boot, where Sarah had already noted the outline of a concealed knife, a movement that telegraphed his intentions as clearly as a training exercise. "Interesting choice of words," Sarah replied, her stance shifting almost imperceptibly to create optimal angles of response. "Because I remember another group of people who made similar threats. It was during a classified operation off the coast of Somalia. They also thought numbers and intimidation were enough." She kept her voice calm, controlled, the same tone she'd used to lead teams through situations where panic meant death. The sirens were closer now, their wail mixing with the rumble of motorcycle engines as some of Hell's Thunder's outer perimeter began to disperse. Inside the market, Sarah had maintained awareness of every civilian position. Martha Chen still recording with her phone, the Anderson twins peeking out from behind their parents' dairy display, Mark Rodriguez quietly coordinating with other vendors to maintain a safe distance from the confrontation. "You're bluffing," Ghost declared, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "You're just some fat farmer's wife who got lucky." His hand strayed toward his jacket pocket again, but Sarah's slight shift in position made him freeze, something in her movement triggering deeply buried survival instincts. "That's another lesson from Special Operations," Sarah continued, placing the tomato back on her stand with deliberate care. "The best cover isn't what you create. It's what people assume about you." Her eyes, which had seemed so ordinary during countless market mornings, now held the focused intensity that had once made hardened combat veterans follow her commands without question. Through the market's broad entrance, the first police cruisers became visible, their arrival causing the remaining Hell's Thunder members outside to scatter like startled birds. Inside, Scorpion's face twisted with rage and alcohol-fueled bravado, his decision to make one final stand visible in his tensing muscles and shifting weight. "Now," Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a combat knife through paracord. "We have two options. You can leave peacefully, pretend this morning never happened, and find somewhere far from Cedar Valley to operate. Orient." She let the alternative hang in the air, her posture suggesting capabilities that had been demonstrated but not fully revealed. Bruiser, still trying to regain his balance after his unexpected flight, grabbed Scorpion's arm. "Boss, something ain't right here, that move she used. I seen something like that in the Marines. We need to—" His warning was cut short as Scorpion shook off his grip, pride and anger overwhelming common sense. "Nobody threatens Hell's Thunder," Scorpion growled, brass knuckles glinting as he raised his fist. "Nobody." His charge forward was fueled by rage and wounded pride, his technique deteriorating further under the influence of alcohol and anger. Sarah's response was a study in economic movement, each action precise and purposeful. The wooden produce stand, which had seemed so ordinary moments before, became a tactical obstacle that guided Scorpion's momentum exactly where she wanted it. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, transforming his aggressive charge into an object lesson in leverage and control. The morning sun streaming through the market's windows caught the expression of surprise on Scorpion's face as he found himself airborne, his trajectory calculated to avoid civilian positions while making maximum use of his own momentum. His impact with a stack of empty produce crates created a crash that echoed through the market's timber frame, accompanied by the splintering of wood and the clatter of his brass knuckles skittering across the floor. "That," Sarah announced to the remaining bikers, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded special operations teams, "was option 2. Would anyone else like a demonstration?" Her position had already adjusted to cover multiple angles of attack, though her outward appearance remained almost casual, a skill honed through years of operating under deep cover. The sound of police boots on wooden planks filled the market as local law enforcement finally arrived, their weapons drawn but held low as they assessed the situation. Mark Rodriguez had moved to meet them, his experience as a former officer helping to control the scene's escalation. Ghost and Ice Pick exchanged quick glances before backing toward the exit, their earlier bravado replaced by the universal body language of those reassessing their life choices. Switchblade, still trying to clean honey from his vest, followed their lead, leaving their fallen leader groaning among the shattered crates. Sarah watched the remaining Hell's Thunder members retreat, with the same calm attention she'd once used to monitor enemy movements during covert operations. "Because I remember another group of people who made similar threats. It was during a classified operation off the coast of Somalia. They also thought numbers and intimidation were enough." She kept her voice calm, controlled, the same tone she'd used to lead teams through situations where panic meant death. The sirens were closer now, their wail mixing with the rumble of motorcycle engines as some of Hell's Thunder's outer perimeter began to disperse. Inside the market, Sarah had maintained awareness of every civilian position, Martha Chen still recording with her phone, the Anderson twins peeking out from behind their parents' dairy display, Mark Rodriguez quietly coordinating with other vendors to maintain a safe distance from the confrontation. "You're bluffing," Ghost declared, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "You're just some fat farmer's wife who got lucky." His hand strayed toward his jacket pocket again, but Sarah's slight shift in position made him freeze, something in her movement triggering deeply buried survival instincts. "That's another lesson from special operations," Sarah continued, placing the tomato back on her stand with deliberate care. "The best cover isn't what you create. It's what people assume about you." Her eyes, which had seemed so ordinary during countless market mornings, now held the focused intensity that had once made hardened combat veterans follow her commands without question. Through the market's broad entrance, the first police cruisers became visible, their arrival causing the remaining Hell's Thunder members outside to scatter like startled birds. Inside, Scorpion's face twisted with rage and alcohol-fueled bravado, his decision to make one final stand visible in his tensing muscles and shifting weight. "Now," Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a combat knife through paracord. "We have two options. You can leave peacefully, pretend this morning never happened, and find somewhere far from Cedar Valley to operate. Orient." She let the alternative hang in the air, her posture suggesting capabilities that had been demonstrated but not fully revealed. Bruiser, still trying to regain his balance after his unexpected flight, grabbed Scorpion's arm. "Boss, something ain't right here, that move she used. I seen something like that in the Marines. We need to—" His warning was cut short as Scorpion shook off his grip, pride and anger overwhelming common sense. "Nobody threatens Hell's Thunder," Scorpion growled, brass knuckles glinting as he raised his fist. "Nobody." His charge forward was fueled by rage and wounded pride, his technique deteriorating further under the influence of alcohol and anger. Sarah's response was a study in economic movement, each action precise and purposeful. The wooden produce stand, which had seemed so ordinary moments before, became a tactical obstacle that guided Scorpion's momentum exactly where she wanted it. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, transforming his aggressive charge into an object lesson in leverage and control. The morning sun streaming through the market's windows caught the expression of surprise on Scorpion's face as he found himself airborne, his trajectory calculated to avoid civilian positions while making maximum use of his own momentum. His impact with a stack of empty produce crates created a crash that echoed through the market's timber frame, accompanied by the splintering of wood and the clatter of his brass knuckles skittering across the floor. "That," Sarah announced to the remaining bikers, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded special operations teams, "was option 2. Would anyone else like a demonstration?" Her position had already adjusted to cover multiple angles of attack, though her outward appearance remained almost casual, a skill honed through years of operating under deep cover. The sound of police boots on wooden planks filled the market as local law enforcement finally arrived, their weapons drawn but held low as they assessed the situation. Mark Rodriguez had moved to meet them, his experience as a former officer helping to control the scene's escalation. Ghost and Ice Pick exchanged quick glances before backing toward the exit, their earlier bravado replaced by the universal body language of those reassessing their life choices. Switchblade, still trying to clean honey from his vest, followed their lead, leaving their fallen leader groaning among the shattered crates. Sarah watched the remaining Hell's Thunder members retreat, with the same calm attention she'd once used to monitor enemy movements during covert operations, as long as they served the right purpose. The market's atmosphere had evolved, carrying a new sense of community strength alongside its traditional warmth. Officer Jenny Martinez had become a regular visitor, her professional entry and... There's something else. The young officer shifted slightly, a movement that Sarah recognized as preluding a question the officer wasn't quite sure how to ask. "Some of what you did today. It looked like advanced military training, the kind that's not exactly common." Sarah exchanged another look with Jack, reading in his slight nod the agreement to reveal what was necessary. "You could say I have some relevant experience," she replied carefully, "though much of it remains classified. What matters is that everyone is safe, and I believe Hell's Thunder has learned that Cedar Valley County might not be the easy target they anticipated." The market's ancient timbers creaked softly overhead, bearing witness to another chapter in its long history. Through the windows, Sarah could see curious onlookers gathering, drawn by the police presence and the departing bikers. The morning sun had reached its full strength now, illuminating the market in a warm glow that seemed to highlight the return to normalcy, even as it cast long shadows from the evidence markers being placed around Scorpion's prone form. In the days that followed the confrontation at Riverside Farmers Market, life in Cedar Valley County shifted in subtle but significant ways. The morning sun still rose over Thompson family farms, where Sarah continued her daily routine of tending to organic crops with the same precision she'd once applied to mission planning. The rhythms of rural life remained constant. Seeds needed planting, vegetables needed harvesting, and Saturday markets still drew the community together. The market itself had transformed, though not in the way Hell's Thunder had intended. The wooden floors, still bearing scuff marks from motorcycle boots, now creaked under the feet of increased foot traffic as word spread about the farmer's wife who had single-handedly defended the vendors. Martha Chen's pie display, repaired and polished, became a gathering point for those eager to share their versions of that morning's events, each retelling growing slightly more elaborate than the last. Sarah maintained her usual schedule, her movements carrying the same efficient grace that had previously gone unnoticed by most observers. Now, though, careful eyes might catch the subtle ways she scanned her surroundings. The practiced awareness that had once kept her team alive during classified operations now applied to ensuring the safety of her adopted community. "You've become quite the local legend," Jack commented one morning as they loaded their truck for market day. His voice carried the warm amusement of someone who had long ago learned to appreciate life's unexpected turns. "Old Jack Wilson's grandkids have started taking self-defense classes, and I heard the Anderson twins are suddenly interested in military service." Sarah adjusted a crate of heirloom tomatoes, her movements economical despite her solid frame. "Legends can be useful," she replied, thinking of how certain rumors had once helped her team operate more effectively in hostile territories. See in Sarah's background, gradually transforming into genuine friendship. The young officer's questions about training and technique were asked with increasing precision, suggesting private research into certain classified operations that remained officially unacknowledged. Mark Rodriguez had organized a community watch program, drawing on his police background and Sarah's tactical expertise to create something more sophisticated than the usual suburban patrols. "It's about awareness," Sarah had explained during one planning session, her words echoing briefings she'd once given to special operations teams. "Understanding your environment, recognizing potential threats, and knowing when to act or not act." The Anderson twins, Katie and Emma, had appointed themselves unofficial chroniclers of what they called the Battle of Riverside Market. Their social media posts, while lacking certain classified details, had attracted attention well beyond Cedar Valley County. "Mrs. Thompson," Katie had asked one Saturday morning, her phone ready to record, "is it true you learned those moves in secret government training?" Sarah's response, delivered while perfectly arranging organic bell peppers, carried just enough mystery to maintain operational security while satisfying teenage curiosity. "Let's just say that appearances can be deceiving, and it's never wise to underestimate someone based on how they look." Local law enforcement had processed Scorpion's arrest with professional efficiency, though the gang leader's attempts to explain how he'd been overwhelmed by a farmer's wife had caused some barely concealed amusement among the booking officers. Hell's Thunder's presence in the region had diminished significantly, their reputation for intimidation somewhat undermined by the widely circulating video of their leader's decisive defeat. Martha Chen's phone recording had gone viral in certain circles, particularly among veteran groups who recognized the techniques Sarah had employed. The footage, showing a seemingly ordinary woman moving with extraordinary skill, sparked discussions about appearance versus capability that reached far beyond Cedar Valley County. "You've started something interesting," Jack observed one evening as they reviewed the day's harvest, his hands, calloused from years of farming, intertwined with hers in a gesture that spoke of deep understanding. "The market's becoming more than just a place to sell produce." Sarah nodded, thinking of how her former teammates would appreciate the irony of her cover becoming a source of community strength. Sometimes the best way to prevent violence is to show potential threats that their assumptions about soft targets might need revision. The autumn sun cast long shadows across their fields as they worked, their movements synchronized by years of partnership both in marriage and in understanding the deeper rhythms of service and protection. The vegetables they grew would still make their way to market each Saturday, but now they carried an additional layer of meaning, a reminder that strength often comes in unexpected packages. Officer Martinez had filed her official report with careful precision, documenting the property damage and witness statements while omitting certain details that suggested classified operations. Her closing notes, however, included an observation that would be appreciated by those who knew where to look. Subject demonstrated unusual tactical awareness and advanced close-quarters combat techniques consistent with specialized military training. The market's ancient timbers still creaked overhead each Saturday, bearing witness to the continued flow of community life. Old Jack Wilson's honey display, restored and expanded, now included a small sign that read, "Protected by Local Heroes," a tribute that made Sarah smile, even as she maintained her watchful awareness of the market's entries and exits. The morning sun painted long shadows across Thompson family farms as Sarah completed her daily inspection of the organic crops, her movements carrying the same methodical precision that had once characterized her pre-mission equipment checks. The autumn breeze carried the scent of ripening vegetables and freshly turned earth, a peaceful contrast to the environments where she'd previously applied her specialized training. Time had a way of transforming events into stories, and the incident at Riverside Farmers Market had become part of local folklore. Young vendors now spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones, while the older generation, those who had witnessed it firsthand, maintained a protective pride in their community's unexpected guardian. The market itself had evolved, its wooden beams and worn floorboards now carrying an additional layer of history alongside the decades of agricultural tradition. "You know," Jack commented as they loaded the last of their harvest for the day's market, "I got an interesting call from an old friend at the Pentagon yesterday." His voice carried the casual tone they'd developed for discussing matters that couldn't be directly addressed. "Seems some people have taken notice of our little corner of Missouri." Sarah adjusted her overalls, the practical garment concealing the athletic frame that belied her apparent bulk. "Notice can be useful," she replied, thinking of how awareness often served as its own deterrent. As long as it's the right kind. Her years in special operations had taught her the value of strategic visibility. Sometimes the mere knowledge of capability was enough to prevent conflict. The market was already bustling when they arrived, regular vendors setting up their displays with renewed confidence. Martha Chen's pie stand, now a gathering point for community news, displayed a fresh batch of apple pies alongside a framed photograph of Sarah helping to repair the honey display after the confrontation. The image, carefully chosen to show her in her familiar role as a farmer's wife, carried a subtle message about strength and community that hadn't been lost on regular customers. Officer Jenny Martinez was making her usual Saturday morning rounds, her patrol route having been permanently adjusted to include regular checks of the market. The young officer had grown into her role as community protector, her training now supplemented by careful observation of certain techniques that Sarah had demonstrated during that memorable morning. "Mrs. Thompson," Martinez called out, approaching their stand with professional casualness, "we received some interesting intelligence about our mutual acquaintances." Her voice lowered slightly as she continued. "Hell's Thunder has apparently decided to relocate their operations, something about the territory being too hot for their business model." Sarah arranged her heirloom tomatoes with careful precision, her hands steady as she considered the implications. "Intelligent decisions should be encouraged," she replied, her slight smile carrying echoes of similar victories achieved through deterrence rather than direct confrontation. "How's your training coming along?" The young officer's eyes lit up with professional enthusiasm. "Those techniques you showed me, the ones you said you learned during your traveling years, they've already made a difference. Last week during a routine stop." Her voice trailed off as she noticed Sarah's subtle shift in attention, a movement that still carried the sharp awareness of someone trained to detect potential threats. Through the market's broad windows, a group of motorcycles had appeared in the parking lot. Unlike the aggressive rumble of Hell's Thunder's machines, these bikes carried military precision in their formation. Their riders, moving with the coordinated efficiency that marked them as professionals, wore patches that would mean nothing to civilians, but carried significant meaning to those who knew where to look. "Looks like we have some new customers," Jack observed, his tone carrying the same careful neutrality he'd used during joint operations briefings in his own military days. The riders, now moving through the market's entrance with deliberate casualness, carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of special operations personnel. Sarah continued her work, though her situational awareness had heightened to full operational levels. She recognized the lead rider's stance, Commander James Ghostwalker Peterson, whose classified operations in the Arabian Sea had occasionally intersected with her own missions. His presence here, while apparently casual, carried official weight that she understood implicitly. "Sarah Thompson," Peterson greeted her, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone delivering an official message wrapped in casual conversation. "Your organic produce comes highly recommended." His eyes, scanning the market with professional appreciation, conveyed deeper meaning, particularly your methods of crop protection. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the subtle insignias on the riders' civilian clothes, markers that would be invisible to most observers but spoke volumes about their operational affiliations. Sarah noted the positions they'd naturally assumed, covering sight lines and access points with unconscious efficiency. "We believe in sustainable farming practices," Sarah replied, matching his tone perfectly, "including appropriate security measures." Her hands remained steady as she bagged some vegetables for a regular customer, but her mind was already processing the implications of this visit. "Would you be interested in discussing agricultural techniques?" Peterson's slight smile carried professional appreciation. "Actually, we're developing a new training program. Focus on rural security operations, community integration. Yours methods have attracted some attention in certain circles. Thought we might benefit from your experience in organic approaches to problem solving." The market's usual morning bustle continued around them, most vendors and customers unaware of the layers of meaning being exchanged in this seemingly ordinary conversation. Martha Chen, however, watched with knowing eyes as she arranged her pies, her own experience with covert operations during her youth in Hong Kong, allowing her to recognize the subtle dance of professional courtesy being performed. Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Jack, reading in his slight nod the same understanding that had characterized their partnership since their first meeting at the Veterans Support Group. "I might be able to offer some insights," she replied carefully, "though my current focus is on sustainable local production." The autumn wind carried the scent of Martha's fresh-baked pies across the market as Peterson and his team arranged themselves casually around Sarah's produce stand. To ordinary observers, they appeared to be nothing more than interested customers examining the organic vegetables. To Sarah's trained eye, their positioning revealed years of tactical experience, perfect coverage of all approaches while maintaining clear lines of communication. "Your technique with local resource management is particularly interesting," Peterson continued, his fingers trailing over a perfectly ripe tomato in a gesture that mimicked shopping while actually conveying operational interest. "The way you handled that recent pest problem, very efficient, minimal collateral damage." Sarah adjusted her display of bell peppers, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Sometimes the best solution is to demonstrate why certain areas aren't suitable for invasion." Her voice carried the same quiet authority that had once guided teams through complex extraction operations. Whether you're dealing with crop-damaging insects or other types of pests. Officer Martinez had positioned herself nearby, her newfound tactical awareness evident in how she maintained a casual appearance while staying within response range. The young officer's growing expertise hadn't gone unnoticed by Peterson's team, whose subtle nods of professional approval spoke volumes about their assessment of local security arrangements. "We're particularly interested in your community integration methods," another rider commented, Captain Sarah Swift Rodriguez, whose reputation in maritime operations had earned her significant respect in certain classified circles. "The way you've maintained effective coverage while appearing to be just another local farmer," It's impressive. Jack moved smoothly between their stand and their truck, his farming activities providing perfect cover for maintaining perimeter awareness. His own military background, though less specialized than Sarah's, had given him a deep appreciation for the layers of security now being discussed under the guise of agricultural commerce. Effective operations require community support, Sarah replied, bagging organic carrots for an elderly customer while her peripheral vision tracked movement patterns throughout the market. Whether you're protecting crops or something more significant, her hands, steady and sure, continued their work, even as her mind processed the implications of this visit. The morning sun had reached its full strength now, streaming through the market's high windows and casting distinct shadows that made tracking movement patterns easier. Peterson's team had naturally settled into optimal observation positions, their practiced casualness masking their professional assessment of the market's defensive capabilities. Your methods could be valuable in other contexts, Peterson observed, his voice lowered to avoid casual eavesdropping. There are situations where traditional approaches prove insufficient. Sometimes you need someone who understands both agricultural operations and more specialized techniques. Sarah's slight smile carried years of operational experience. I'm retired for a reason, she responded, though her tone left room for discussion. Found something worth protecting right here. Her gesture encompassed not just their produce stand, but the entire market, the community she'd chosen to guard. Martha Chen approached with a fresh apple pie, her movement precisely timed to provide cover for a more private exchange of information. Special delivery, she announced cheerfully, though her eyes carried the sharp awareness that had once served her well in operations across Southeast Asia. Still warm from the oven. Peterson accepted the pie with a knowing nod, his fingers briefly brushing a small data device into Sarah's hand during the exchange. We've got some interesting satellite data on crop patterns, he said, his words carefully chosen. Might help with your agricultural planning, if you're interested in consulting. The market's wooden beams creaked overhead as Sarah processed the implications. Her retirement had been deliberate, a choice to trade the high-stakes world of special operations for the genuine peace she'd found in farming. Yet the skills that had made her legendary in certain circles hadn't diminished. They'd simply been redirected toward protecting her chosen community. Consulting has its place, she acknowledged, securing the device with practiced discretion, as long as it doesn't interfere with local operations. Her emphasis on local carried clear meaning. Her priority remained the safety and security of Cedar Valley County. Officer Martinez's radio crackled with routine updates, the normal sounds of small-town law enforcement providing perfect cover for the more sensitive discussions taking place. The young officer had grown significantly in her tactical awareness, her presence now adding another layer to the market's security infrastructure. We respect local autonomy, Swift Rodriguez assured her, selecting some heirloom tomatoes with careful precision. This would be more about sharing your expertise in community-integrated security measures. Your recent demonstration proved particularly effective. The autumn breeze carried the sound of children laughing near the market entrance, a reminder of exactly what Sarah had chosen to protect when she'd settled in Cedar Valley County. She watched as the Anderson twins helped their parents set up their dairy display, their movements now carrying subtle hints of the self-defense training they'd enthusiastically embraced after witnessing her confrontation with Hell's Thunder. I'll review your crop data, Sarah agreed finally, her words carrying carefully measured acceptance of the offered opportunity. Agricultural insights should be shared, after all. Her positioning shifted slightly, automatically adjusting to maintain optimal situational awareness, even as she continued her normal market activities. The late morning sun cast shorter shadows across Riverside Farmers Market as the subtle dance of professional courtesy and operational planning continued. Peterson's team maintained their casual poses, while Sarah completed transactions with regular customers, each movement carrying layers of meaning understood only by those with specific operational backgrounds. Speaking of agricultural insights, Peterson continued, selecting some organic kale with deliberate care. We've noticed similar pest problems emerging in other rural communities. Your sustainable approach to pest control has attracted attention at certain administrative levels. Sarah adjusted her display of autumn squash, her movements efficient and purposeful. "Every community has its own ecosystem," she replied, the familiar weight of the data device reminding her of countless similar exchanges in her previous life. What works in Cedar Valley might not translate directly to other locations. Jack returned from their truck with another crate of vegetables, his timing perfect for adding his perspective to the conversation. "Though some principles are universal," he observed, his years of military experience evident in how he seamlessly integrated into the discussion. Proper preparation, community involvement, clear demonstration of capabilities. Officer Martinez had drifted closer again, her patrol pattern now incorporating the tactical awareness Sarah had been quietly teaching her. The young officer's evolution from eager rookie to capable protector reflected the broader changes in Cedar Valley's security posture since the Hell's Thunder incident. "We've been authorized to establish a pilot program," Swift Rodriguez mentioned, her selection of bell peppers providing cover for the conversation. "Training local law enforcement and community leaders in advanced security integration techniques. Your experience with both worlds makes you uniquely qualified to advise." The market's ancient timbers creaked overhead as Sarah considered the proposal. Martha Chen approached with fresh coffee, her movement creating a natural break in the conversation while providing additional coverage from casual observation. The elderly baker's own background in covert operations made her an ideal participant in these carefully choreographed exchanges. "Coffee's fresh," Martha announced, her words carrying the weight of years of shared operational understanding. "Just like old times, isn't it?" Her knowing smile spoke of missions long past and secrets well kept. Sarah accepted the coffee with a nod of appreciation, both for the beverage and the tactical support. "Times change," she replied, thinking of how her life had transformed from classified operations to organic farming, though some skills remain relevant. Peterson's team had naturally repositioned themselves to maintain optimal security coverage while appearing to simply enjoy their coffee and fresh pie. Their professional appreciation for the market's defensive layout was evident in their subtle glances and positioned stances. "The program would be entirely advisory," Peterson assured her, his voice pitched to avoid carrying beyond their immediate group. "No direct involvement in operations, just sharing your expertise in community-integrated security measures." The market had grown busier as the morning progressed, regular customers mixing with tourists drawn by the now famous story of the farmer's wife, who had single-handedly defeated a biker gang. Sarah noted how the increased foot traffic had actually improved security, creating natural surveillance and community awareness that supplemented more traditional measures. "I have responsibilities here," Sarah stated, her hands steady as she arranged a display of fresh herbs. "The farm, the market, the community we've built." Her eyes met Peterson's with the direct gaze that had once commanded special operations teams. Any advisory role would need to work around those priorities. Jack's presence beside her carried the solid support that had characterized their partnership since their first meeting. "Sometimes the best way to protect something is to help others learn from your experience," he observed, his words carrying the weight of his own military service. The autumn breeze carried the scent of Martha's baking through the market as Sarah weighed her options. The data device in her pocket represented a link to the world she'd left behind, but also an opportunity to extend the protection she'd established in Cedar Valley to other communities facing similar threats. "Send me the full briefing," she decided finally, her words measured and precise. "I'll review it and determine how I might be able to help without compromising my commitments here." Her stance shifted slightly, automatically maintaining tactical awareness, even as she made this significant decision. Peterson's slight nod carried professional appreciation for both her capabilities and her priorities. "We'll have the complete package delivered through secure channels," he confirmed, his team already beginning to make natural-looking preparations for departure. The market's wooden floors creaked under their boots as Peterson's team moved toward the exit, their formation as precise in withdrawal as it had been in arrival. Sarah watched them go with the practiced eye of someone who had led similar teams, noting how they maintained coverage even while appearing to be nothing more than satisfied customers. The afternoon light slanted through Riverside Farmers Market's high windows as normal business resumed, though Sarah's heightened situational awareness caught the subtle ripples of change moving through the community. Regular customers went about their shopping, unaware that they had just witnessed a carefully choreographed exchange between operatives whose previous missions remained classified at the highest levels. "Interesting morning," Jack commented as they began their usual midday reorganization of their produce display. His voice carried the same calm understanding that had helped him navigate both military service and their unique partnership. "Looks like retirement might need some redefinition." Sarah adjusted her apron, the practical garment now carrying a different meaning after its role in her confrontation with Hell's Thunder. "Some skills shouldn't go to waste," she replied, thinking of communities beyond Cedar Valley that might benefit from what she'd learned in both special operations and small-town security integration. Officer Martinez had returned to her patrol route, but her movements now carried a new awareness, a deeper understanding of how individual actions could contribute to community security. The young officer paused near their stand, her professional demeanor masking her excitement about the morning's developments. "Mrs. Thompson," Martinez began, her voice carefully controlled, "the department's been discussing expanding our community outreach programs after what happened with Hell's Thunder." She let the sentence hang, her meaning clear to anyone who understood the broader implications of that confrontation. Sarah nodded, her hands never stopping their methodical work with the produce. "Community engagement is essential for effective security," she replied, the words carrying echoes of briefings she'd once given to special operations teams. "Though sometimes the most important work happens quietly, without drawing attention." Martha Chen appeared with fresh coffee and a knowing smile, her own background making her the perfect courier for sensitive discussions. "The market board is meeting next week," she mentioned casually, though her eyes carried deeper meaning. "They're interested in discussing some security upgrades. Nothing too obvious, of course." The autumn sun cast long shadows across the market floor, as Sarah considered how her different worlds were beginning to intersect. The data device Peterson had delivered sat securely in her pocket, its contents potentially offering a framework for expanding Cedar Valley's successful security model to other rural communities. "Balance is important," she observed, arranging organic tomatoes with tactical precision, between maintaining normal operations and implementing necessary protective measures. Her words carried meaning beyond the market's immediate security concerns, touching on the broader challenges of integrating specialized capabilities into civilian communities. Jack moved to assist a customer, his positioning providing perfect coverage for their conversation, while maintaining the appearance of routine market activities. "Sometimes the best defense is helping others develop their own capabilities," he noted, his military experience evident in his assessment. The market's wooden beams creaked overhead as Sarah processed the various threads of opportunity and responsibility, now weaving through her carefully constructed life. The peace she'd found in farming remained genuine, but perhaps it could coexist with a different kind of service, one that drew on both her specialized training and her understanding of community protection. "We've built something special here," she said finally, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once guided teams through complex operations. "Not just security, but a model for how communities can protect themselves while maintaining their character." Officer Martinez nodded in understanding, her own role in Cedar Valley's evolution becoming clearer. "It's about more than just responding to threats," she observed, her training under Sarah's subtle guidance showing in her analysis. "It's about creating an environment where certain types of problems become less likely to occur." The afternoon crowd moved through the market, regular customers mixing with visitors drawn by the story of how one farmer's wife had changed the security dynamics of an entire community. Sarah watched them with the same careful attention she'd once given to mission-critical operations, noting how the increased foot traffic actually contributed to the market's overall security. "Peterson's proposal has merit," she acknowledged, her decision forming with the same methodical precision she applied to all tactical situations. "As long as it supports, rather than disrupts, what we've established here." Martha returned with a fresh pie, its delivery providing cover for passing a small notebook containing preliminary security recommendations for the market board. "Some recipes are worth sharing," she commented, her words carrying layers of meaning understood by those with certain operational backgrounds. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh produce and baked goods through the market, as Sarah contemplated the next phase of her unique service to her adopted community. The skills that had once been applied to classified operations could be adapted, transformed into something that strengthened rather than disrupted the peace she'd found in Cedar Valley. Times change, she observed to Jack, their years of partnership evident in how easily they communicated complex ideas through simple phrases. But the mission remains the same, protecting what matters, just in a different way. The market's ancient timbers stood witness to this subtle transformation, supporting not just the physical structure, but the evolving role of a former special operative who had found a new way to serve. The lessons learned in combat zones and covert operations would be translated, adapted to strengthen rural communities while preserving their essential character. The late afternoon sun painted warm shadows through Riverside Farmers Market's windows as Sarah and Jack began their end-of-day routine, their movements carrying the same efficiency that had characterized their military careers. The market was quieter now, most vendors packing up their remaining goods, though the day's events had left a palpable sense of change in the air. "You know," Jack said as he carefully loaded their remaining produce into their truck, "I remember something my old commanding officer used to say about ripples in a pond." His weathered hands moved with practiced care, each crate positioned precisely. "One small change can affect the entire body of water." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. The confrontation with Hell's Thunder had created its own ripples, transforming not just Cedar Valley's security dynamics, but potentially reaching far beyond their small community. The data device Peterson had delivered now rested securely at their farm, its contents promising to bridge her past and present in ways she hadn't anticipated. Officer Martinez approached their stand one final time, her end-of-shift patrol carrying a new purpose. "Just got word from dispatch," she reported quietly, her positioning natural but tactically sound, another subtle change from Sarah's influence. "3 other communities along Route 27 have reported decreased criminal activity since word spread about what happened here." "Information can be a powerful deterrent," Sarah replied, adjusting her apron as she secured their display stands. "Sometimes the most effective defense is making potential threats realize the cost isn't worth the risk." Her words carried the weight of experience from both classified operations and small-town security. Martha Chen appeared with one last delivery, a fresh pie and what appeared to be a simple receipt, but contained coded observations about market security patterns. "For tomorrow's breakfast," she offered with a knowing smile. "Something tells me you'll be having some early morning visitors." The market's wooden floors creaked beneath their feet as the last customers made their final purchases. The Anderson twins, helping their parents close their dairy stand, now moved with a subtle awareness of their surroundings that spoke of their ongoing self-defense training. Their transformation from carefree teenagers to security-conscious young adults reflected broader changes in the community. "Community strength isn't just about physical security," Sarah observed, watching the natural flow of people and activities with trained eyes. "It's about creating a network of awareness and mutual support." Her hands moved steadily as she secured their equipment, each motion precise and purposeful. Jack's presence beside her carried the solid reliability that had characterized their partnership since they'd met. "Reminds me of that operation in Bangkok," he mentioned quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "How the local market vendors created an intelligence network more effective than any official system." The autumn wind carried the scent of approaching evening through the market as Sarah considered the parallels between her past missions and current responsibilities. The skills that had once been applied to classified operations were finding new expression in protecting and strengthening rural communities. "Tomorrow's meeting with Peterson's team will be interesting," she noted, her mind already processing potential approaches to expanding Cedar Valley's security model. Balancing operational experience with practical community needs requires careful consideration. Officer Martinez had positioned herself near the market entrance, her newfound tactical awareness evident in how she monitored the final departures of vendors and customers. The young officer's growth under Sarah's guidance represented another kind of ripple effect, creating a bridge between traditional law enforcement and more specialized security approaches. The market board is already talking about implementing some of your suggestions, Martha added, her own background in covert operations adding weight to her assessment. Nothing obvious, just subtle changes that make the space naturally more secure. Sarah watched as the last rays of sunlight played across the market's worn floorboards, highlighting the scuff marks that remained from the Hell's Thunder confrontation. Those marks now served as a reminder of how quickly things could change and how important it was to be prepared for any possibility. "We're creating something new here," she reflected, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded special operations teams. A way to apply specialized knowledge to everyday protection without disrupting the community's character. Jack secured the last crate in their truck, his movements reflecting years of both military precision and farming practicality. "Sometimes the best operations are the ones that look like nothing's happening at all," he observed, echoing principles they'd both learned in their previous careers. The market's ancient timbers seemed to creak in agreement as Sarah made one final sweep of their area, her situational awareness never truly deactivating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings with Peterson's team, discussions about expanding their security model, training sessions with local law enforcement. But for now, she could appreciate the peace they'd helped create in their chosen community. "Ready to head home?" Jack asked, though his stance indicated he was already aware of her completion of security checks. Their years together had created a synchronization that went beyond words. "Almost," Sarah replied, making one last adjustment to their display setup for tomorrow. "Just ensuring everything's in place for whatever comes next." Her words carried multiple layers of meaning, encompassing both their market preparations and the broader changes taking shape in Cedar Valley County.